It's over. There's no chance. There is no hope. There is no way. When is it too late? Today we look further into the miracle of raising a young girl from the dead. Let's examine the focus of Jesus in this miracle. In other words, what was Jesus focused on? Now, there's going to be some similarities between this lesson and the lesson last week because I designed it that way. Just so you know, there's two little lessons that I think go together, the miracle within a miracle. We started last week with 3 perspectives, and I'm going to do those again, however, a shorter version of them. But I'm going to start with Luke 8, chapter 8, verse 49 through 56. And it says, "While he yet spake, there cometh from the ruler of the synagogue's house, saying to him, Thy daughter is dead, trouble not the master. But when Jesus heard it, he answered him, saying, Fear not, believe only, and she shall be made whole. And when he came into the house, he suffered no man to go in, save Peter and James and John, and the father and mother of the maiden. And all wept and bewailed her. But he said, Weep not, she is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn, knowing that she was dead. And he put them all out, and took her by the hand, and called, saying, Maid, arise. And her spirit came again, and she arose straightway. And he commanded to give her meat. And her parents were astonished, but he charged them that they should tell no man what was done." So that's Luke's perspective. And just to kind of bring us up to speed a little bit, before I started reading, what had happened was the ruler had come to Jesus and said, "My daughter is sick, and would you come pray for her and that she'd be healed?" Jesus began to go that way, and then encountered the woman with the issue of blood. And we talked about that last week. So the woman with the issue of blood, she'd had this issue of blood for 12 years. She got her healing. She said to herself, if I could just touch the hem of his garment. And she got her healing. He asked, who touched me? His disciples were kind of amazed at that. There's all these people pressing around you. But she was healed. There was a change in her whole situation right there when she touched Christ. And it's after that we picked up here today with them coming to him and saying that the ruler's daughter has died. Okay? So that's where we are in this. Now, I want to look at the reference in Matthew, and it's found in chapter 9, verse 23, and we're going to read through 26. Verse 23 says, And when Jesus came into the ruler's house and saw the minstrels and the people making a noise, he said unto them, Give place, for the maid is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when the people were put forth, he went in and took her by the hand, and the maid arose. And the fame thereof went abroad into all the land. Okay? So Matthew has a very short account of that actual miracle. And then we're going to focus again here in Mark 5, and we'll focus on Mark's account, which is really pretty good and detailed. Verse 22 is really the beginning of this. And behold, there cometh out of the rulers of the synagogue Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet. And he besought him greatly, saying, My little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. And Jesus went with him, and much people followed him and thronged him. And then the next section of verses is where we find this woman with the issue of blood. Now, different accounts, but they all lead to the same thing, and that is that the young maiden was 12 years old, that the woman with the issue of blood had this for 12 years. And we talked last week about the fact that why 12? And 12 being the perfection of government or rule. And so I like to kind of place those meanings into the story sometimes and look at them and see what that tells me. And so when I see that the ruler comes from the synagogue, the ruler from the synagogue comes, and his daughter, numerically speaking, and I don't want to overdo the whole numbers thing, but I do want to address it. That numerically speaking, his daughter is 12, this number of perfection or government rule, and he is a ruler from the synagogue. And on the way, as Jesus goes to minister to his daughter, this woman with an issue of blood for 12 years, who's spent all of her money, who's gone to physicians, who's suffered greatly, all of these things, is miraculously healed when she touches the hem of Jesus' robe. And so there's some symbology and coming to the end of what government can do, coming to the end of what man's ruling can do, coming to the end of the perfect, if we could say the perfect government system. There is something to that. Again, don't want to overemphasize it, just want to make sure that we talk about it a little bit. And then we talked last week a little bit about this idea of how long is 12. Well, in the case of the woman with an issue of blood for 12 years, that's a long time. It's a really long time. In the case of a young girl, 12 years old, dying, you would say that's no time at all. They barely lived. It's still 12 years. But our perspective is a bit different, and that's the lesson we did last week on perspective. So today we want to examine this second miracle a little bit more completely and kind of see where we go with this. So where we left this miracle last week was miracle 1, part 1, which is the ruler comes and kneels down and says, if you would just come, in fact, there it is, and it says in verse 22, cometh one of the rulers out of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet and besought him greatly, saying, my little daughter lieth at the point of death. I pray thee, come and lay thy hands on her, that she may be healed, and she shall live. There's that word, shall live. It's a statement of fact. It's not she might live, she could live. It's she shall live. And so when we look at that, the first part of this miracle, here's this ruler comes, recognizes the authority that Jesus has, greater than the authority of him as a ruler in the synagogue, and has great faith. I mean, what else would you call it? If you just come and pray for my daughter, she'll be healed. If you just come and pray for her, she'll be healed. And there are people who have great faith. And there's people with great faith in all walks of our life experiences. There's people who are ministers that have great faith, and they have great things that go on around them because they have this great faith. And sometimes we get into that mode where if so-and-so would just pray, if they would pray, then everything would be okay. I have to go to so-and-so to get prayer. And that's not the way this is mapped out. There are times when having so-and-so pray might be really helpful emotionally. There may be a particular, burden on their heart for something that you want prayer for. That may be true. God may choose to use them that way. But here's the reality. We have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And any one of us can reach out in faith and see God move. He's not, in that sense, a respecter of persons. There are people who called to certain ministries, that sort of thing. But as I've said before, and we talk about things like prophetic words, Balaam's donkey spoke. So if he can use a jackass, he can use anybody to speak. The woman with the issue of blood reached out and touched Jesus. No one went and laid hands on her and prayed for her. Her faith reached out. So faith is a great piece to the miracle puzzle, if you will, what causes and creates that atmosphere for miracles. So here we have this ruler who comes and demonstrates in a very succinct, set of scriptures here that he has great faith that if Jesus will just come and pray, his daughter shall live. Now, there's some debate about this young girl's physical condition. There are those that are writers and commenters on Scripture that say, well, she really wasn't dead. Okay, she was just in a coma for some reason, and so she wasn't raised from the dead. It doesn't change the fact that there's a miracle that takes place in this story, and we'll get to that. But I just want to explain to you a little bit from my perspective. I read the Bible and I look at things and I understand that there's times when there's things that are analogies. I understand that there's times when we can take something kind of to the nth degree, if you will. And so when I start talking about 12 and relationship to government or rule, I'm kind of pushing that out, trying to make us think a little bit bigger and broader, not necessarily saying that that's literally how it has to be looked at. But for the most part, if you read the Bible and believe it says what it says, you're going to be right more often than not, by far, because the Bible has not been shown to be wrong. And many times we have science that says, well, that's not the case. And then a few years later, science goes, oh, I guess that is the case with things. And there's a couple scriptures we could do apologetics. I guess at some point we could talk about that. But the reality is, I just want you to see that there's great faith on the part of this ruler in this particular miracle. And then there's delays. He's got this daughter who's dying, and I'm going to go with dying versus slipping into a coma, okay? But you can do whatever you want. Anyway, she's dying, and his hope is in God. His hope is in Jesus. And he says, if you just come pray with her. And right off the bat, there's a delay. Time is of the essence. Oh yeah, there's a delay. So it's a good delay. I mean, this woman gets healed. It's a miracle, right? I don't know if he's sitting there thinking, crud, how many miracles can he do in one day? What is there a limit? I don't know if that's what he's, that was my opportunity and I missed it. One of the things I found over the years is God's timing is not mine. I have things I want to see happen right now, and there's times when it's like, well, I need this miracle now, God, I get sort of what I was praying for, but I don't get it in the time frame I wanted it. And I think, you were late in arriving with my miracle, God. And that's kind of how we are as human beings sometimes. We don't say, hey, God, thank you for the miracle. And your timing is, I'm sure right, and I was probably being impatient. No, God, you were late. We probably need to fix our attitude a little bit. Anyway, so there's a delay. And yet the ruler doesn't seem to get bent out of shape about it, right? Jesus heals this woman who's got the issue of blood. Everything seems to be okay. And as soon as he's done healing her and, tells her that she can go in peace, and we talked about that again last week. And it says, I just want to find the spot here. Verse 35, while he yet spake, there came from the ruler of the synagogue's house certain people which said, thy daughter is dead. Why troublest thou the master any further? It's too late. There's no chance. There's no hope. There's no way. It's over. Pretty depressing. And as soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he saith unto the ruler of the synagogue. Who's he speaking to? The one who came and asked him, the one who petitioned, the one who demonstrated the faith, the one who's been waiting. He says to him, be not afraid. Addresses his fear instantly. Fear is the enemy of faith, if you will. Be not afraid. And then he says, only believe. Don't even give place to being fearful in your mind. Just believe like you were a second ago. Just have faith like you did a second ago. See, the enemy wants to always send doubt. He wants to send fear. But if we want to have an atmosphere for miracles, we need to have an atmosphere of faith. Don't be afraid, only believe. And he suffered no man to follow him. So Jesus is now narrowing down who's going to make the trek over to the ruler's house. So he suffered no man to follow him except for Peter, James, John, the brother of James. So he didn't take 12. He took a smaller number. Why? It goes back to don't be afraid and only believe. So sometimes we let things grip our heart. Sometimes we let the emotion of things catch us up, and we can get caught up in doubting, or we can get caught up in fear, or we can get caught up in all these things. But Jesus is getting ready to do something pretty miraculous. And you'll see in a second where this paring down comes into play. And it says, he cometh to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and seeth the tumult, and them that wept and wailed greatly. Now, this is where you get professional mourners, okay? It was the custom that you had to have at least one good mourner going when you had a death. So the idea that she's only in a coma, I'll leave it to you, but they've got the professional mourners there. They're wailing and weeping. And when he was come in, he said unto them, why do you make this ado and weep? Why are you making a spectacle out of this? The damsel is not dead, but sleepeth. Now, it's kind of interesting when we look at this, and I'm going to read forward just a little bit further. Verse 40, and they laughed him to scorn. There's always one poking fun, right? There's always one. You're going to do what? The easiest thing there is to be is a skeptic or a critic. I don't believe we have to apologize for anything God does. I don't believe that we have to help God with the promotion side of things. I don't believe that we have to fake our way through anything. I believe that God is real and that he does real miracles, and that we're on the verge of seeing him do a number of miracles again. But there will be those who laugh. There will be those who scorn. And part of that is because they are driven in part by the enemy, and the enemy wants to create discouragement and doubt and fear. And it says in the next sentence, but when he had put them all out. In other words, they wanted to laugh and make fun, and he said, out. Just get out. And that's what we have to do. We have to tell the enemy, get out. We're not going to have your doubt and your fear in here. Get out. When we're hearing from God, we can know. When the atmosphere for miracles is there, expect the enemy to try and interfere. And when he does try to interfere, send him out. He's getting ready to challenge the norm. It's normal that when people die, they're dead, and you mourn and you bury them. It's also, as we learned last week, it's also normal that when somebody has an issue of blood and they've spent all their money and they've suffered at the hands of all the doctors and they've done all the things they can, that touching the hem of somebody's robe isn't going to cause them to be healed. See, that's why it's a miracle. It's not the norm. I've referenced Winky Pratney frequently, but he says a miracle is when God decides to intervene and override his own rules. So an example is if you're in an airplane, it loses power and its wings fall off and it's hurtling towards the ground, gravity, the rule of gravity is at work. And if God chooses to stop your descent and gently touch the plane down on the runway, that's a miracle. Because God chose to intervene in his own rules that he set up and cause gravity not to function normally in that instance. Does that make sense? In other words, it's God. Now, it says, backing up, verse 39, and when he was come in, he said unto them, why make all this ado and weep? The damsel is not dead, but sleeps. This word dead, when he says she is not dead, what he's saying is she's not all the way dead. It's not completely over. And you could say, well, see, there's an example of how maybe she was just in a coma. Again, I don't care. You figure it out however you want to figure it out. But I believe what he's saying is, I haven't spoken just yet. I haven't given up just yet. She's not dead until I say she's dead. She's not dead until I say there's no hope. You want to know when it's too late? You want to know when there's no hope? Well, you need to go to Jesus because he knows when it's too late. He knows when there's no hope. He is our hope. So he says, she's not completely dead. Somewhere I hear Mel Brooks in that, right? Been mostly dead all day. But anyway, there's something there. And he says, but she just sleeps, or she sleepeth. She's just resting. Sometimes when our situation is hopeless and we're dead, we need to rest in God. That's what happens. And then of course they laughed him to scorn and all. And he sends them out, and it says, he taketh the father and the mother of the damsel, this is verse 40, and them that were with him, and entereth in where the damsel was lying. Now this word damsel talks about, it can be male or female actually, but it talks about half grown, like a child that's half grown. We know, again, approximately 12 years of age. But it also can mean an immature Christian. So many times miracles happen as a way for the immature Christian to have their faith built up, for them to have an understanding of who God is, so for them to understand how real things are, so that they can have the opportunity to go out and speak with greater faith their testimony of salvation, their testimony of the power of God. So he says to this immature one, it says he took her by the damsel by the hand and said unto her, Talitha cumi, which is, being interpreted, damsel, I say unto thee, arise. And arise, if we go back a couple of weeks, is the same translation. The word make oneself to get up. So there's some self-effort there. Or collect yourself, pull yourself together. Very, very much the same word that we saw Peter speak to the man at the gate beautiful when he said, rise up and walk. Same Greek word here. Pull yourself together. And he says under arise, and straightway, that's right away, immediately, very quickly, the damsel arose up, pulled herself up, and walked. And walked is important because, again, as we learned a few weeks ago, this is the idea of to demonstrate the ability to, or to tread upon. So she rose up and demonstrated that she was all right. She rose up and tread upon death. Rose up and tread upon all the mourners that were scorning what Jesus was going to do. In other words, she was truly the proof of God right there. And if we look at it with this idea of damsel being the immature Christian, we could say that Jesus reached and took the immature Christian by the hand and said, arise, stand up, pull yourself together, and collect yourself. And when we do that, when we begin to grow in God, when we rise up, we can start to demonstrate what he's done. It says, and straightway the damsel arose and walked, for she was of the age of 12 years. So she's demonstrating her healing, and it says, and they were astonished with a great astonishment. They weren't just regular astonished. They were greatly astonished, okay? They were surprised, befuddled, shocked. And yet the word here has a very positive context, you know? Kind of what I would call the fireworks response, you know? Ooh, ah, oh, right? Okay. So kind of that. They were astonished. And it says that he charged them straightly that no man should know it, and commanded that something should be given her to eat. In other words, she was mostly dead all day. He raised her from that death experience. She demonstrated that she was healed. And then he took care of her very immediate physical needs and said, give her something to eat. Take care of the little things. Give her something to eat. I know there's times when I feel like if I don't eat, I'm going to be dead, but it's not really true. So he's mindful of those little things that we need. And it really is a miracle. So it comes down to this. An atmosphere of miracles. What's happening sandwiched around this woman with the issue of blood being healed is that this young girl has a dad who's in authority but recognizes the greater authority of Christ, recognizes that he has something that the ruler himself does not have. He has a ability to have miracles happen. He recognizes it is the faith in Christ that's what's going to cause the miracle to happen. We look at this miracle, and what do we see? Well, we see the presence of God. Jesus is there. We see faith from the Father. Here's faith that if this guy comes and prays, my daughter will be okay. So we see that. We see faith in action. Now, what do we see from the damsel? We don't see her faith. She's dead. It's kind of the opposite of the woman with the issue of blood. The woman with the issue of blood has her faith. She reaches out in her faith. There's nobody praying with her saying, oh, hey, pray this prayer, or I have faith for you, sister. It's all on her own. Then we see the exact opposite of that with the damsel. She's dead. Her father has faith. So we can't say in an atmosphere for miracles, it's all about my faith. Nor can we say in an atmosphere for miracles, it's all about your faith. But faith is certainly a factor. And what is faith? It is hope in God. It is trust in God. It is believing in God. And it goes back, what I've said several weeks in a row now, it goes back to right relationship with God. We have to have the presence of God. We have to have right relationship with God. Faith in God. And you'll see time and time again, there's a physical action that takes place. Now, I'm not saying that you have to necessarily have a physical motion. But what I am saying is, if you look at this, it's rise up. Jesus said to the seas, be still. There's something that's an action. It could be a spoken word. It could be a physical word. Whatever. There's an action that goes with it, and that is because of our need to change our situation. She's lying in the bed. He says, rise up. I mean, couldn't he just say, hey, wake up, bring her a breakfast tray. She needs to eat. Nobody says rise up. Why? Because there needs to be a demonstration of what has happened. The woman with the issue of blood, instantly it ceased. Demonstrated action. She knew she had been healed. The damsel, rise up, walk about, eat some food. Not too many dead people eating these days. Demonstrate what God has done. We've talked weeks in a row now about our need to have a testimony, our need to tell what God has done. If you want to see an atmosphere for miracles, presence of God, faith, right relationship, and the ability to testify. Now he says, tells them, don't go tell anybody. And I think that's in large part because of the mourners and scoffers that were there. It's like, don't even give them the satisfaction. But the reality is that when God has done something great for us, we want to tell somebody. You want to tell somebody what God has done. And that's really important. So this morning, I want to just take a minute. And you may have been looking for a miracle for a long time. You may have been waiting what seems like forever. That's the 12 years with an issue of blood. 12 years waiting for a miracle to happen. Or you may just be dead. We can be dead inside, just damaged and hurting to the point that there's just like no life there. But here's the reality. Jesus is passing by. You have the opportunity to reach out and touch him. You have the opportunity to let him know what your needs are. And he's faithful. If you just take a moment as you're watching this and you just invite the presence of God. So, Father, we need your presence. We need you in our midst. And you can let him know what it is that you need. Let him minister to your needs this morning, whatever those might be. He's faithful. If he tells you to rise up, pull yourself together. But if we want to see a miracle, we need to seek the one who can do the miracles. And we need to have his presence in our midst. So take a little bit of time this morning. Just invite God into your midst, whether it's one or two, but into your his presence into where you're at. Let him know what your needs are. Let this word encourage your heart that you would expect from God, but also that you'd kind of pull yourself together and rise up and do what he's asked you to do. I believe God will speak to your heart. I believe God's speaking to hearts. And I would challenge you this morning to rise up, accept that healing, accept that miracle that you've been looking for. Stop worrying about, is it too late, or is there no chance, or is there no hope? And start recognizing that all of those things, your hope, your chance, your way, your answer, all come from Jesus. And that's it for this week.